All right, here we go. Hi, everybody. I am Aaron Mesh. I'm the news editor at Willamette Week. Somehow I stumble over my own title. This is just the second or third of what's going to be 30 or 40 of these in the next few weeks. It's an important race, and we're grateful to have both of you here. So this is the race for Senate District 26. Roz Mason and Daniel Bonham are here with us. Mr. Bonham, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, give us a 3-minute bio, but start, if you don't mind, by telling us a little bit about your district.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you for allowing us to do this again. Roz, it's nice to see you on the computer screen.
Thank you. Likewise, except I can't see you.
Here, real quickly. There you go. So yeah, currently serving as Senate or House District 59 State Representative. I was appointed to that position in November of 17. Feels like forever ago, and just yesterday at the same time. It's an odd experience to be a part of, but have thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to represent 7,000 square miles and 70,000 people in north central Oregon. Have served on various and sundry committees in that time. Have passed legislation, have fought against legislation I didn't like, helped modify and amend some. And I remember the day I was appointed, I got a call from a reporter asking me, what my job was at that point. Day one, just sworn in. And I remember my answer was I felt like I was on a listening tour, trying to figure out what people needed, what people were concerned about. And almost 5 years later, that's what we do, right? We try to engage in our community, we try to learn and understand what the needs are, and still am doing that. I put about 30,000 miles a year on my car, traveling to and from my district. So when I was in Canby a few weeks ago campaigning and someone said, "How do you clear out here?" I said, "This is wonderful. This is half the size of my previous district. I have 3-hour drives in my current district, being at the far north end, being at the far east end now. To have the farthest point an hour and a half away is wonderful." So I'm a married father of 2, a small business owner. I grew up in Tigard, graduated Tigard High School, went to Linfield College where I met the love of my life, my wife Lori. We have the 2 children, Jennifer and Jack, are 24 and 22. Jen's in her second year of grad studies, studying to be a child psychologist. She wants to be a school psychologist. And then Jack's in his senior year at Grand Canyon University. And so my kids are getting ready to enter the working world. And they're falling in love and doing all those other things I'm not ready for yet either. Mm-hmm. But no, it's a great time to be alive. It's a challenging time to be alive. At the same time, it's a challenging time to do business in Oregon. It's a challenging time to be in the political realm and trying to engage in civil discourse. So
you're in the hot tub and
stove and spa. Yeah,
stove and spa. So how's business?
Business is great. What I found during the pandemic, and even when we bought the business in 2007, coming out of the recession, the housing collapse, was that people that have money still have money, and the people that are struggling to get by are looking for affordable options. I'm always intrigued that election years, especially presidential election years, but gubernatorial election years, the midterm cycle still rings true, that people are now looking at wood stoves more than they ever do. I sell more gas and pellet stoves in the off cycle than I do, but for whatever reason people think that I better get my wood stove before they ban these things.
Oh, okay.
And it's a very affordable means of heat. And so, we've thrived in the last 15 years. The business has done extremely well, and we never looked for it to be a way to build wealth, but more an opportunity to engage with customers and simultaneously raise our kids. I was able to coach sports teams that when I was working at Evergreen Airlines, I didn't have time. I was traveling too much. So to come home and run my own business and hire people to put in places to where we could manage our time a little differently was kind of the goal, and it's been successful so far.
Great. Ms. Mason, could you give us a brief bio and tell us why you're running for the seat?
Absolutely. Well, the happiest years of my childhood were spent in Hermiston, so the east side of the mountains, and I've been looking for a way to come back for a number of years and was able to move to the Dalles in 2014. I love rural. It's in my bones. You know, the happiest times of my life, I think, were out camping with my parents and enjoying this beautiful, beautiful natural environment we have. When I look back at my history, I have a very diverse professional and personal background that I think really equips me to address a lot of the needs and challenges of this time. So I'm an educator. I have a mathematics degree. I've taught math in career technical education settings. I've taught middle school science, high school language arts, high school social studies, and career technical education. I'm also a hospital chaplain. And that came from really what was a formative experience for me soon after high school, when I became a volunteer at what was then the Portland Women's Crisis Line, now Call to Safety. And it opened my eyes to dynamics of power over and lack of safety in homes. That was a real a shock and something to really wrestle with about how humans can treat each other. And that introduction to trauma dynamics as well as societal power over dynamics led me to feel that after years of working in that field, I needed to balance the scales in a sense. And so I pursued clinical chaplaincy training at 2 VA hospitals and was actually a commissioned naval officer in the chaplain candidate program. Alas, I ran out of training spots just when I needed them because of my age to keep going. But that commissioning oath was very important to me, and it really continues to inform my sense of service. So I very much have been motivated by service, and just another piece that I think I find myself reflecting on a lot these days when I look out at some of the dynamics, both in behavioral health, crime, the economy, is that I was trained in what is really the cutting edge of nervous system informed resilience, and was the training coordinator for a group that was going to provide this to the U.S. military with the absolute top-notch research behind it. Unfortunately, Congress failed to pass a defense budget in a timely manner, and that got me back here in the Dalles. And so at the moment, I work in security, and I know some of the hot-button issues this year are inflation and public safety, so I hold both an unarmed and armed license. I'm a member of a police chaplains association, and I'm a responsible gun owner, which is something that people may not initially associate with someone who's living and representing as a Democrat. Also, I'm endorsed by the Independent Party.
Could you tell us a little more about your security work? What are you doing exactly?
Right. So at the moment, I'm working in a shall not be named large data center in the region, and so that is not an armed position. However, I pursued on my own more cutting-edge training, so that I did have my armed license, as well as additional training in what they call the tools, so baton, handcuffing, pepper spray, taser. And that training would prepare me to work somewhere like one of the dams in the area. And I also did additional training in personal protection and executive protection. And one of the things that led me to that at this time was a sense that things are really heating up in our society, and that folks on the center and left are not necessarily really on top of some of their personal protection skills or assets. And so I wanted to, if need be, step in and be of service. And then ironically, I learned that this race was available, and it felt like a perfect fit.
So, Raz, this is Mark Sussman.
Hi, Mark.
You hear me?
Yeah.
Aaron and Nigel, may I ask a question or two?
Yes, but
Yeah, we're going to cut you off quickly if things get out of hand, though. Just kidding. Yes, please.
I didn't hear it. Raz, so you moved to Hermiston when?
I lived in Hermiston as a child from 77 through 79. And kind of ironically, for someone who's gone on to hold leadership positions in climate change education, my dad was a civil engineer working on the Boardman coal plant.
And you returned to Hermiston, is that where you're living now?
No, I live in the Dalles now, and I returned to the Dalles in 2014
And you did so for what reason?
because I love it. I love rural.
But, you know, I'd love to be living in Paris, but I can't work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what were you doing prior to that, and what were you doing when you came to the Dalles?
So prior to that, I had finished my second master's degree, this one in divinity, and completed a year-long chaplaincy residency at the VA in Portland. And that was the height of the Great Recession. So I was looking for things to do. I kicked off a life coaching business, which I think people chuckle about, but I've certainly been through a lot of change, and I am interested in the security field. So I ended up moving to Washington, D.C., and that's where I got reconnected with the Mind Fitness Training Institute, which was this group that was poised to do the resilience training for the military. And that was a couple-year process while they were getting off the ground. And so when I came back to the Dalles, I had kind of thought, I'm not sure where this is going, so I had already interviewed for some teaching jobs, and one opened in the middle of the year that I was able to step into.
What kind of a teaching job?
So 7th grade science
In
in the Dalles.
the Dalles. Gotcha. So you were doing that, but aren't now, and now you're a security officer, is that correct?
That is right, and that gives me the freedom to run for this office, and I've actually simplified my life after some climate change leadership. I helped stand up a climate change education foundation. My co-founder and the funder had a different model of change, and so it is now a private grant-making organization. And I wanted to spend more time on political research and writing.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it's my understanding that this district, as it's been drawn, and forgive me, I'm not 100% sure of where the lines in this district are because no one's sure where the lines of any district are anymore, but it's my understanding that the voter registration difference in this district is less than 1,000 people between Republicans and Democrats. I think Republicans have a 1,000 voter edge in this district. Is that right?
Yes.
So both of you are making the case essentially to undecided voters. What's your pitch, starting Daniel with you, to someone who is not a Democrat or not a Republican, but someone who is looking for the most sensible possible candidate?
Thank you for that question. It's the fascinating question, right? Chuck Thompson won this seat by 204 votes, I think, and that was obviously before redistricting, but the two people that held the House seats that were nested in the Senate seat were both Democrats. And the thing that I heard from most of those voters as I campaigned in the same area was that Chuck was in the community, Chuck engaged, and that he listened. And so, you know, to look at the redistricting process and how it went down, and so yes, I know exactly where the lines are. I'm one of the few people that can tell you which streets they end on, and I don't know that I can tell you why, but I can tell you where. Sure. And so I take that experience and I pivot back to when I first started. And I came into the legislature in the House. It was 35-25 Democrats to Republicans. Democrats had the majority. We went into that 2018 election cycle hoping to pick up a few seats to get a little closer to balance, and we lost 3 seats and went into a super minority. And the Senate did the same. And in that political environment in Salem, what we saw, at least from my experience, what I saw was the envelope being pushed, trying to move liberal, progressive agendas that had more national kind of ideals to them than necessarily being Oregon-centric. Mm-hmm. And again, 4 years later of serving in caucus of 22, and then we picked up a couple seats, but we lost one in the 2020 election, so we went to 23, still in the super minority, still in a position where Democrats didn't need our votes, and still watching things that were ruggedly unpopular with the voting public as we knew it, you know, from our conversations and from limited polling that we did. But like cap and trade, to see stuff like cap and trade pushed, to see Measure 110 pushed, where we decriminalized drug possession, and now seeing the results of that without the investment that was really promised on the back end for treatment. And people are seeing some of these policies with their own eyes and the results of those policies versus what they were told was going to happen, what was marketed to them. They're seeing what's happening in California right now through their cap and trade program, and what's happened to the cost of energy and the cost of fuel relatively to what our cost has been. And our cost spikes have been significant. Like, people are complaining about affordability, and yet they say, wow, at least we're not suffering those costs. And yet they want to see action taken. They want to see problems solved. And so my big pitch is balance. Like, I am there to restore balance. And my voting record has been more conservative because I felt like it needed to be. Like, I felt like the voice of opposition needed to be strong. And yet I want to solve problems just like the next person. You know, I did co-chief sponsor paid family and medical leave, worked with Democrats throughout that entire process. And, you know, we had a Republican caucus meeting a few weeks back where we talked about what our priorities were. And you can imagine that some of my colleagues wanted to see programs like that, which is a big tax, rolled back. And people looked at me as the vice chair of business and labor and said, Bonham, will you draft a bill to roll back paid family and medical leave? And I said, no, people want that protection. They want the environment that it creates in terms of job security, in terms of the ability to take care of a loved one. And so, you know, I know with my conservative base as a Republican that was not popular, but I do believe was what Oregonians wanted. And so, you know, trying to be pragmatic with being responsive to the needs of my community, being a voice for balance down in Salem in some case, which means taking a more conservative approach to push back against some other extreme ideas. But that's my pitch, is trying to bring back balance to Salem.
Great. Same question, Ross.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good one, and that word of balance really resonates with me as well. I think as a Democrat and the nominated independent candidate, my track record in engagement in the community also shows that I'm committed to this. So as you can imagine, I have the kind of credentials you'd want from someone if you're a Democrat. So I've been involved in the state party, leadership in the county party. So that side, I mentioned behavioral health, a lot of work in the domestic abuse field, and teachers, you know, a lot of times I think there is a general tendency toward the left, the center left among the educators. I've also made a point of developing relationships, personally and professionally, with folks on the right. And so I show that through my association with the military, police chaplains, member of Oregon Women for Agriculture, which is a group that leans center right. So I've been doing that in the community, and I have both Mr. Bonham and I live in the same community, and so to a degree we have shared social networks, and I have not been aware of the kind of listening tours of which he speaks. But I'm definitely committed to that balance, and I think in some ways I can articulate how we need to be a little more pragmatic and do more bridge building because I am part of that group. It's not a matter of cutting off or leaving town and saying I'm just not going to play. Wow. So the other thing too, I think it comes to the kind of future that we're focused on, the kind of hope. And my positions, like I said, I have moderate positions. Mr. Bonham is supported by Right to Life PAC. And so I'm unaware, sir, of your view on the legitimacy of the presidential election. But I think that folks are looking for someone who is more moderate in their positions, and that is something that I can hold with integrity.
Well, let's talk about those positions. Let's talk about those. Mark, if you give me a moment. Let's talk about those positions for a second, just so we have some clarity on this point. She's asked you whether or not you believe that the 2020 presidential results were valid. Were they?
Well, Joe Biden's the president of the United States, if that answers the question.
It does.
I think it opens up, though, broader concerns that everybody should have over voting integrity. I mean, I absolutely think that there were things that happened due to COVID and adjustments that states made where I don't know that necessarily, here in Oregon, we've had vote by mail for years, and I'm confident in our election integrity here in the state of Oregon. I've met with the local clerk and understood the process. When Dennis Richardson was Secretary of State, he did a tour, and I was able to engage with him while he was traveling throughout the state to look at how we manage our elections. But there were plenty of states that were doing those types of things for the first time. And so I do think there's areas of concern nationwide with respect to voter integrity. And yes, Joe Biden's our president, but that doesn't mean that there weren't some shenanigans with the last election that should be scrutinized and ensured in the future to protect future election cycles.
Do you have a position that you can articulate on abortion?
You know, I'm endorsed by Right to Life. I'm a pro-life candidate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exceptions for rape, life of the mother, nothing?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
No, that's always been, I think, an accepted caveat. Health of the mother. You know, I do think Oregon has some of the more extreme abortion laws on the books. That said, there are laws on the books. They're established. Their current statute. I think as I have traveled, not just within my district, but statewide, I think there is concern over how extreme Oregon's laws have become. And I do think there's room for compromise to maybe look at some third trimester abortion exceptions to roll back. So, you know, I don't think the conversation's completely closed, but at the same time, I think it really is set here in Oregon.
Ms. Mason, do you want to respond to any of that with your positions on the matter?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that I worked for a number of years in the domestic abuse field, and that alerted me to just how often difficult it is for people to have genuine choice. And we also know developmentally that younger folks who maybe are having sex or unprotected sex may be lacking information. Certainly a lot of folks lack the kind of economic opportunities that allow them to choose to bring a child into their family. I think we need to be careful about how we frame some of these later term abortions. I mean, it happens so incredibly rarely, and it is almost always a case of life of the mother and is an excruciating choice for a woman to make who's already named her baby, in all likelihood, prepared in nursery. So I think it comes down to really fleshing out who are the people who are impacted by these choices. I don't think anyone wants more abortions, but we know from states like Colorado, the way to reduce the need for abortions, it's more sex ed, really solid sex ed, more economic opportunity, access to contraceptives, and access to health care. So I too would like to see the number of abortions drop dramatically. I just know there's an evidence-based and humane way to do that.
Mark, you had a question.
I just a quick question for both candidates, which is, can you explain as precisely as you can if there are any ways in which you deviate from the beliefs of your party? So Daniel, can you tell us if there are any ways in which you deviate from the beliefs of the Republican Party, and same with you, Roz, about the Democratic Party?
Raj, you can go first on this one.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pick two. I'm going to pick guns and the economy. So part of my belief that I can represent a broad, I talk about it, I say I'm a big tent Democrat. That means I really am committed to representing a broad constituency, like all the folks need to be listened to. And that means that I need to be willing to stand up to my party and disagree. And I do that around some of the language around gun safety or gun control. Now, I plan to vote for Measure 114. However, I do have some concerns about the issues regarding making folks who have larger magazines, at a stroke, making those folks outside the law. And I also listen to some of the arguments that folks have. We really have the Second Amendment in our DNA. So concerned about government tyranny and so on. Now, I'm also a teacher, and part of becoming a teacher in this day and age is I have to wrestle with the fact that I may die in the pursuit of my duties and protection of my kids because of our lack of continuation back when we had an assault weapons ban / carbine ban back in the day. Now I think I'm mixing my metaphors. The horse is out of the barn. We have, something like 22 million of those carbines out there in the world. So that's one thing. The second thing is I'm quite critical of, I'm going to say, corporatist democratic economic policy, because the Rand Corporation a couple years ago did a study looking at income inequality. And if we had kept the income inequality post-World War II through the early 70s, average Americans would have, actually the bottom 90% of Americans would have $50 trillion more. Median wage would almost be double. And so there are a lot of choices to advantage Wall Street over Main Street that I'm very critical of. That Wall Street has benefited 75 to 1. So,
Russ, can you give an example on the state level? You're running to be a state senator.
yeah.
Votes you might take, or what positions on a statewide basis might deal with the issue of the economy and might disagree with your fellow Democrats?
Well, I think that some of it is in the framing and the narrative. I believe I'm a pro-business candidate. Now, Oregon is one of 35 states that has laws already on the book for benefit corporate forms. And so I would be a huge proponent of that. For me, it's about both and. And so that benefit corporate form takes the maximizing profit for the owners and the shareholders, and it adds to it employee benefit, community benefit.
Party in Oregon on that?
I am at odds in the sense that I talk about it frequently, and I want to get into the weeds about some of our economic policy. So I think it's less,
Okay.
I want to go broad, and I need to bring it back.
So let's talk about guns.
Yeah.
How would you change gun laws in the state of Oregon?
I think we need to focus on safe storage, and I think we do need more training. However, what I would like to see...
How you would deviate from the Democratic Party and how you would change gun laws?
I think I don't deviate in the practice of some of the things that are being proposed, but I definitely deviate in the messaging, which sometimes, among some of the folks, says anybody who wants an assault rifle, aka carbine, is a bad person. There's no reason for those. And I say, yes, there is.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, how about you? Any places where you deviate from the state Republican Party
Yeah.
in your caucus?
Yeah, and thank you for asking a difficult question. These are always my favorite when you make me think about what I've got to say here. Within my party, there's still a lot of concern over the validity of climate change. And I think you have to go no further than go visit your local farmers to find out that they're suffering from a shift in climate. And so I think where I'd love to see our Republican platform shift is to investment in adaptation, to recognize that this is happening and to figure out a path forward. I don't believe it is the gloom and doom end of the world policy topic that sometimes it's advertised to be. You know, we were told during the cap and trade discussion that the planet had 12 years left before we were at some cliff that we couldn't come back from. But at the same time, I do think it's a serious topic, and it is one of the reasons why I've engaged in the energy and environment conversation. I'm fascinated by how we produce energy, and I think a balanced mix is appropriate. But I do wish that my more conservative folks would come around on this issue and talk about it with a little more seriousness.
Okay, thank you.
Nigel, you've got questions?
Nope, we covered what I wanted to cover.
All right. Let's see. We're going to do one more policy question for each of you, which is, Daniel, I'll start with you, and then Roz, I'll have you go next. What is the position that your opponent takes that most concerns you?
I mean, the fact that I felt like she was trying to politically posture me in this interview on abortion, I find disconcerting. I think that it is established law, and I've been struggling with even, Democrat leader in the House, Julie Fahey, has come out with tweets saying this is established law, and then, oh wait, we're in an election cycle, you need to fear this. Like, this is the big Republican thing that's going to change, and this is going to destroy your ability to have an abortion in the future, and especially with the caveats that we talk about. Like, I would never ever put a woman in a position, and I appreciate Ms. Mason talking about, the third trimester, and I don't ever think that would be an easy decision for a woman, especially if her health was on the line and having to choose between her and her baby. It is such a difficult topic. Quite frankly, I don't like talking about it because I know the emotions that it brings up, and I do feel like it's established law. So I think that's probably the part that frustrates me right now. I don't know my opponent that well to know all the positions that she's taken. Quite frankly, I've kind of ran my campaign the way I want to run it, which is to let people know what I'm for as opposed to what my opponent is for or against. I do feel like I've been there and I've been an effective voice in Salem for my community, and have been able to work both in a partisan manner and in a bipartisan manner to get some things accomplished, and to stand up for things that I think make the lives of my constituents better. So political posturing, I guess, today is the one thing I could point to that I'm not a fan of.
Roz, for you, what concerns you most about your opponent's positions?
I think it's alignment with the Republican Party, because sadly, I really feel for folks who have been a part of this party for decades, and I think my parents' Republican Party, and they were no longer Republicans. My mom died 2 years ago. My dad is now a Democrat, but it is no longer sort of the fiscal conservative arm, the careful, let's really look at where the money's coming from and going. And at this time, with what's happening with MAGA affiliated and Trump affiliated candidates, and my understanding was that Mr. Baum is such, I can imagine it's incredibly hard to walk that line. And I would like to see from any Republican more courage around calling out what is really some divisive rhetoric, and sometimes even violent rhetoric. The sense that some people, particularly our former president, is above the law, and beginning to challenge the legitimacy of the FBI and things like that. So I actually look at that with a fair amount of compassion. I mentioned my opportunity to be aware of some of the nervous system research that's newer, kind of the trauma-informed approach. And under stress, humans, we just don't think as complexly. And so I have to really cultivate the ability to ground myself and ratchet down my own nervous system activation. But I look around and I see just a lot of reactivity, emotional reactivity in the Republican Party at the moment. And that worries me just because of historical precedent. When folks get emotionally ramped up that way, it's harder to see one another as neighbors, and see that we're all in it together. I think of my obligation to represent people who sit around a big table of reality, and different people see different things based on where they're sitting. And as someone who would go to veterans' hospital rooms and sit down with someone, I always learn something. Everybody has a story. Everybody has something important to share. And one of my main things is that we need to extend dignity. And so, unfortunately, what I hear from a lot of Republicans, and not as much rebuttal from within the Republican Party, is what I would describe as oversimplification and meanness.
Respond to that.
You can respond to that.
Thank you, Aaron. So what I find fascinating is, again, a pivot to national policy topics. Bring it local. Bring it back to the state of Oregon. When I sat in a body who stood in judgment of one of our fellow colleagues that had done something that rose to the level of being reviewed by the conduct committee, a special committee formed, and we voted unanimously with the exception of the one individual that voted against being ousted for themselves. But we Republicans held Mike Neerman accountable. Where is that same accountability within the Democrat Party? There's a complaint that I'm aware of, and I'm the co-chair now of the conduct committee, and I got to be honest with you, I find this committee a joke. I find it completely appalling. In fact, I sent a letter of resignation last week to Dan Rayfield, only to find out that because I was appointed by the body, I have to resign to the body. I don't resign to the Speaker of the House according to Mason's rules, so I'm still on the committee. And I was told by my fellow co-chair that we weren't going to look into a complaint about Tina Kotek because it was in litigation outside of the body. The individual that made this complaint and the 4 or 5 former state reps, Democrats who testified against Tina Kotek are looking around saying, in the rule it says you have 84 days to review these things. I've got documentation from an email thread that was sent to me the other day that shows it going back to July of last year. I mean, you want to talk about not being able to hold your own party accountable, and in this system of power imbalance and this culture that we're trying to change at the Capitol, and this whole idea behind Rule 27 and what we're trying to do, like, I find it laughable that a Democrat would suggest that Republicans are the ones that don't hold each other accountable, especially in this state. I don't know why this isn't moving forward. I don't know if it's because Tina Kotek's running for governor and you want her to be the next governor, so we're trying to bury this thing. But there's a complaint. There's an active investigation from July of last year that's still unresolved. Whether it should come before the conduct committee, I don't know. I don't know what's in the complaint. I've not seen any of the data. I just know that I've been called by the complainant saying, hey, you're the co-chair of this committee. Can you do something about this?
Who is the complainant in that case?
It's Diego Hernandez. And I was called by a few former Democrat state reps. I don't know if they want to be named, so I'll be quiet about that. But there were 5 that gave testimony in the investigative process. But I don't know where that is. But I was appalled when my co-chair said, we're not going to talk about that. There's a legal matter. So I did ask Diego, I said, is there a pending legal? Like, is that the reason? He said, I have nothing legal going on right now. So I'm frustrated to hear that explanation of, again, trying to utilize a national commentary as opposed to my actual record or who I am as a person or how I engage in these processes. I was elected by the body to serve as a co-chair of that conduct committee.
Well, I appreciate hearing what you're suggesting, and transparency is incredibly important. And one of the things that I see, and again, this is broad. Yes, it happens nationally, and yet both of us are aligned with national parties. And so everything is interconnected, alas. Well, I wouldn't say alas, because it is the way of things, right? We work more of the systems reality than kind of a linear change model. So again, I really want to acknowledge, I appreciate that. One of the advantages I have is I'm not a party insider in the sense I've gotten $2,500 so far from the state party. Now, even if I'd gotten a lot more, I would still, from the get, communicate that I want to understand, and I think we need to move forward. And that perspective is really informed by being an educator. And it saddens me tremendously when I look at folks, and they do tend to be on the edges of our political parties, who are easily dismissive of other people, and sometimes to the extent of dismissing the humanity of others. And we have so many challenges around climate change, the economy, public health, some of our technology challenges like cybercrime. We need to be working together. Those are wickedly intertwined problems. And so there's more to learn. And the way people learn is by trying stuff out and then reflecting and tweaking and trying it out. And so there is vulnerability, and there needs to be, I say, humility around what we know. And that is a path for people to improve and grow and change, rather than kind of demonizing or dismissing people at a stroke. Again, I understand that response is it's a human response in situations of high anxiety, yet it's extraordinarily devastating and damaging to our civic process. So, I want to capitalize on the fact that I'm a Democrat, but I'm a rural Democrat, to be willing to have some of these hard conversations and foster them in such a way that I can call people aside and not shame them publicly, but really call folks so we can be the best, adhere to our highest values as much as possible.
Complete shift, because we are out of time. We every cycle try to ask one fun question so that people can get to know you a little bit and give a sense of who you are. And Daniel, I think we'll go with you first on this. And the question is, if you knew that this was going to be tonight, your last meal, what one food would you want to be sure that you would have as your last thing to eat?
It would be more than one, and it would be tacos.
Very good. And Roz, same question.
I would probably have a medley of ice cream.
Very nice. Thank you so much to each of you for your time on this. I've appreciated this conversation, and our endorsements come out on October 19th.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for having us.